Now, the Reserve Bank has cut interest rates again, a move meant to jolt life back into an economy that's frankly stalled. But behind the headlines, the picture looks pretty grim. Inflation is edging higher, unemployment is climbing, and households are still stretched thin at the checkout. On top of that, the country's teachers are back on the picket lines, frustrated at what they see as a government unwilling to value their work. It all paints a pretty grim picture of uncertainty, an economy caught between optimism from the government and lived hardship for ordinary Kiwis. So where does Labor stand in all this? What's their vision for steering the country through? Labor's Finance Spokesperson Barbara Edmonds joins me now. Malo Lele, thank you very much for your time.
Malo Lele and Happy Tongan Language Week, Will.
Happy Tongan Language Week. Look, the Reserve Bank has cut the OCR again. Right call, given inflation has crept back up?
Yeah, in the summary of your introduction, you're absolutely correct. The economy has stalled. Christopher Luxon promised to make things better. They have gotten worse. You know, the Reserve Bank released every quarter a monetary policy statement, and they cut the OCR yesterday. The Reserve Bank is doing the heavy lifting for what the government, because the government isn't.
Yeah. And, you know, the government, I mean, this is classic government rhetoric in terms of the cut proves the economy is on the mend. I don't buy it. Do you?
You just have to read the actual statement to see that there is real, there is uncertainty, you know, unemployment. They project unemployment to still potentially track up. They still also believe that inflation is going to track up and won't come back into the midpoint of the target range, or around 2.5% until next year. And last quarter, the economy went backwards. So that means that more people are unemployed. And as we've seen, we've had over 72,000 New Zealanders leave the country. That's a record high.
Certainly. Look, all of this begs the question, of course, what would Labor be doing differently to control inflation, which remains stubborn, while still supporting growth?
So if you look at what is causing inflation to be sticky, when Labor was last in government, it was all the goods that we were bringing into the country. But actually what's happening now is that the goods inside the country are more expensive. So people know food prices are higher. Beef and, mince is up 25%. Butter is up 42%. Milk, cheese, those basic things that everybody depends on, and there are very rare alternatives for it. For Labor, our focus really is on the policies that will help families to stay in work. Jobs so important. And so when you were seeing in the last year 18,000 construction sector roles go, that's because the government paused, cancelled or reviewed projects. And for the Pacific community, our unemployment rate is over double of what the national unemployment rate is. We're at over 12%. And particularly in the construction sector, where Pacific people is quite a strong workforce, that's why we're seeing the record numbers leaving New Zealand and going to Australia, because things are getting worse for them, not better.
Yeah, indeed. And look, sorry to be repeating the question, I suppose, but I mean, for Pacific communities, as highlighted, where unemployment rates are consistently higher, what would you do differently?
Yeah, so what we would have done differently is not pause those infrastructure projects.
Sure.
That's had a massive shock, in relation to the construction industry, which, again, as I said, Pacific people feature strongly. But also we look at Tupu Aotearoa, Tupu Toa, that program that we had in place to help Pacific people who are not in employment, educational training, connect them in with employers, get them into jobs. The government has cut that. So it's really clear that those Labor policies of keeping the infrastructure sector going, keeping those programs to help get people back into work, those are Labor policies, and those are the things that we'll continue to look at as we go into the next election and release our policy.
Do you think the government is perhaps underestimating how much pain households are in right now? Since coming back, I just scratch my head thinking, how can a government be so out of touch?
Absolutely. They're disconnected to communities. They're clearly just speaking within a bubble of themselves, or perhaps the part of the economy that suits them. But I'm here in Auckland today. I've been at the Business Hall of Fame last night. I'm here today speaking to businesses. Auckland unemployment is high. So we're really having a government who's disconnected, who's not focused on the main things. You look at what they're focused on, changing passport names. I saw this week David Seymour around helmets. We should be focused on the things getting people into work and we shouldn't be cutting programs that get people into work. That's a big focus for Labor, but also really, really disappointing to see the government that they're not listening to people on the ground who are suffering.
Yeah, and as has been highlighted this week, one of those particular groups suffering, teachers. I do not blame teachers for getting out on the picket line. They've been forced ultimately to work at breakneck speed with a government that wants to make major changes perhaps too fast. What do you make of yesterday in terms of going on strike?
Yeah, teachers have to stand up for themselves, and we're standing with them. A 1% increase for every year over 3 years, that's less than the rate of inflation. The government should know that. They know numbers. They should know that that's less than the rate of inflation. You can see why they wanted to stand on the picket lines. As you said, huge reforms coming through the education system. So they're not being valued as much as the government says they really, really value them. They clearly don't if they don't want to show it with the money for their wages. But also, secondly, you've seen very senior government ministers believe that they're on $147,000 a year.
Yeah.
I've lost count of how many teachers have said that's a lie and they're wrong, and they need to basically get their facts straight and make sure the offer they put on the table supports them. The second thing as well, I would say, is the pay equity, the cancellation of those claims. Secondary school teachers were part of those 33 claims that were cancelled.
Wow.
They can no longer apply for the pay equity regime or to try and get pay equity for them because they don't meet the new threshold that the government put in the law earlier this year of 70%. So that really clearly shows that the government doesn't value teachers and the education system that the teachers have to work within.
That's baffling. Okay, look, give me a bit of perspective, I suppose. Maybe I'm looking at it, the last Labor government, through rose-tinted glasses. But I suppose what I'm asking is, what was the relationship like between unions and the government when Labor was in power? Was it any better?
Oh, it was robust, and that's the way these relationships always are. The unions are standing up for the people that they represent. And as much as the government here, they just attack the unions, but they forget that the unions are members of people in that profession, whether it's teachers, whether it's nurses, whether it's doctors. So they used to strike under us as well, and we had robust discussions. But ultimately, the government is giving them sort of a triple whammy with huge reforms, putting a really weak pay offer on the table, and then removing a process for them in order to get better pay or pay equity within their sector.
You have perhaps, and this is just my nerdy opinion, you have one of the coolest portfolios. But with all of that in mind, I mean, we've heard a lot of criticism from Labor. I'm sure voters want to know now, what's your economic platform that you want to run on?
Yeah, I totally get the interest in what Labor is going to bring to the next election. I see why people want an alternative because they're not seeing what they wanted, what this government promised them when they came in. And so we've clearly set our focus when we develop our policies and as we start to release them in the later part of this year, will be on jobs. We know we need to keep employment here. We know we need to support businesses so they can hire people. We're going to focus on homes because we know how much a percentage of a person's income is because of their housing costs. So we know we need to, the best way to be able to make sure that housing costs come down is the supply. But what we've seen with this government is they've only built 45 houses in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And then obviously for us, access to healthcare is super important. Most people will see the strain that the health system is under. We need to ensure we support it properly.
Sure.
The government in this year's budget, as much as they say it's record health budget, in real terms, it was not sufficient because it wasn't in line with inflation and with the population growth as well. So that those cost pressures, they obviously weren't funding them well. So we need to make sure that we are able to and provide the support that the health system needs. And finally, obviously for us, cost of living. We need to make sure we have policies that help address the cost of living. When Labor, what we took to the election was making sure we had free prescriptions. We made sure that people were able to, for people under 25, that they had free transport. All this was costed and planned for us as we took to the 2023 election. So as we look to the 2026 election, we will start to release policies. But I totally get why people are wanting to look to Labor for what our policies are, because they're just not getting the relief that was promised by this government.
Yes, certainly. Look, I'm not looking for policy platform announcements. I'm sure, as you've highlighted, you'll when the timing's right, Labor will announce that. But if you could just characterise perhaps the vision generally that Labor wants to go in. Is Labor leaning towards a big vision rebuild for the economy or a more tighter, more cautious approach?
Well, this is the time, right? This is the time we need to have a good hard look at what is working for our economy, what is making sure that people are staying in work, what is ensuring that first home buyers or families can be able to buy the homes that suit them, or be able to ensure that they have got the security of tenancy within, if they're renting. We need to make sure that some of those very core basics that everybody needs. And in my community of Aotearoa, when I'm out there talking, they're saying things are getting hard, and we want to be able to see a vision from Labor that means that you're connecting with us and what matters to us. And they're very clearly saying it both in Aotearoa and in communities across the country when I'm there. It really does come to those basics of jobs, health, homes, and being able to help us with the cost of living. And that's why we're really focused on that.
Look, just before we wrap it up, we'll end on a fun one. I've been reading the former Finance Minister Grant Robinson's book this week. I'm almost finished it. It makes for fascinating reading into the mindset of Grant Robinson. Tough times when he was the Finance Minister. How would you characterise his leadership as Finance Minister? And is there a particular Finance Minister that you not modelled yourself off, you're unapologetic yourself, but, one that you're like, man, they did a good job?
So how do I summarise Grant? He was a Minister of Finance who really cared for New Zealand. And, that's why we had wage subsidy, that's why we had the small business cash flow loan scheme, that's why we had to do what we did with housing. Grant was definitely a finance minister who understood that, yes, we had to responsibly look after the government's books, but also what really mattered was people. So I've taken a lot of lessons as I've taken on the finance role from both Grant and in my time, what I can remember. I'm not that old, but I am older. Sir Michael Cullen as well, because you look at the legacy policies that came through with those two men, under Jacinda and Helen Clark. It's KiwiSaver, it's the super fund for our pension, it's the winter energy payment, it's working for families. Those really legacy policies which have survived now even through different governments. That's what Labor is known for, and that's that's what I'll do as part of the finance role and as we look into the future.
Indeed. Oh, man, I could nerd out on the subject for hours. Hey, thank you very much for your time. That is Labor's Finance Spokesperson, Barbara Edmonds. You have a lovely rest of your day, eh?
E malo o Bristol.
Cheers.